The moment you become aware that motivation has slipped out of the room, you feel a sudden hush settle over the space, a quiet that makes every task seem heavier and every intention more distant. It is that instant of stillness that asks you how anything will get done when the spark you counted on has dimmed. Each morning you rise with a flicker of purpose, a promise whispered to yourself that today will be different, that the plans you drafted in the night will finally take shape. By the time the clock ticks past the first few hours, the excitement that carried you through the alarm has faded, the inbox looms larger, and the urgent-looking items turn into background static. You sit at the desk, eyes fixed on the blank screen, and wonder why the fire that once pushed you forward has gone out. That question creates a tension between the self you imagine, a motivated dreamer, and the self you must become, a disciplined architect of your own life. The shift required is not a hunt for more motivation. It is a redefinition of identity. It moves you from the mantra, "I do things when I feel like it," to the declaration, "I am someone who follows a system regardless of feeling." When you stop depending on fleeting emotions and begin to trust a structure you have built, you step out of a reactive stance and step into a proactive one. The change is subtle yet powerful. It does not demand a dramatic epiphany, only a series of deliberate adjustments that reinforce each other until the new identity feels inevitable. Lesson 1 invites you to separate desire from execution. Begin by writing the exact outcome you want. Then identify the smallest possible action that nudges you toward it. That micro-action becomes the entry point, the moment you can step through even when your mind is clouded. After you complete that tiny step, pause and notice how quickly resistance dissolves. The habit of starting with a single, undeniable action builds a momentum that no mood can stop. Imagine a scenario where you need to write a report for a client. Instead of staring at the full outline, you decide that the first micro step is to open a new document and type the title. The act of opening the file creates a psychological opening. The rest of the work follows more easily. Reflect on this. What is the tiniest step you could take right now that would break the inertia? Lesson 2 teaches you to anchor your work to an external cue that does not rely on internal enthusiasm. Choose a time of day, a location, or a ritual that signals the beginning of work. The sound of a kettle boiling, the click of a laptop lid, the sunrise spilling across the windowsill can serve as the trigger. When the cue arrives, you move into work automatically, as if a switch has been flipped. The cue becomes the bridge between the mind that doubts and the body that follows. Picture yourself in a small home office where the kettle's whistle marks the start of a focused hour. As soon as the whistle fades, you sit, open your notebook, and begin. The cue has already done the convincing work. Ask yourself which everyday sound or sight could become your launchpad for action. Lesson 3 focuses on constructing a feedback loop that rewards consistency, not intensity. At the end of each work session, record what you accomplished, however small, and give yourself a brief, tangible acknowledgement, a stretch, a sip of water, a moment of quiet. This loop reinforces the behavior pattern, turning the act of showing up into a habit that feels natural. Over time, the brain learns that the process itself carries value, and the need for a motivational surge fades. Imagine a writer who, after a 30-minute sprint, notes that a paragraph was completed and then stands to stretch, feeling the muscles loosen. The stretch is a small celebration that signals the brain effort has been noticed. Consider how you might close each session with a simple, physical sign of completion. Lesson 4 asks you to design a buffer for emotional dips. Anticipate days when energy is low and plan a low-intensity version of your system. If the full routine includes 3 hours of focused work, the buffer might be a single 15-minute sprint followed by a quick review. Knowing that a reduced version exists removes the temptation to abandon the process entirely. The buffer acts as a safety net, ensuring that the system remains intact even when the emotional tide recedes. Visualize a busy professional who, after a sleepless night, chooses to spend 15 minutes sorting emails instead of tackling the full project plan. The reduced effort still moves the day forward and preserves the habit of engagement. What minimal version of your routine could you rely on when motivation is low? Lesson 5 aligns your identity with the system by verbalizing it in the present tense. State, for example, I am someone who reviews my priorities each morning. I am someone who completes the first task before checking messages. Saying it as a fact, not a goal, trains the mind to accept the identity as reality. When you catch yourself slipping into I wish I could, replace the phrase with the present tense affirmation. The language you use shapes the self-image that guides your actions. Picture a student who, before opening a textbook, repeats to themselves, I am someone who studies a chapter before scrolling social media. The statement becomes a self-fulfilling anchor that steers attention. Notice the moments you default to wishful thinking and rewrite them in the present. Lesson 6 encourages you to schedule regular reflection moments to evaluate the system's effectiveness. Once a week, set aside 30 minutes to look at the data you have collected, completed actions, cues that worked, buffers that were used, and any gaps that appeared. Ask yourself which part of the system felt seamless and which part felt forced. Then adjust a single element for the next cycle. Continuous, small refinements keep the system alive and adaptable, preventing it from becoming a rigid routine that you eventually resist. Imagine a freelance designer who, at the end of each Friday, reviews the week's cue triggers, notes that the afternoon coffee break often interrupts flow, and decides to shift the cue to the morning. The tweak improves consistency without overhauling the whole schedule. What single adjustment could you make after your next review? When you practice these 6 steps, a quiet confidence begins to build beneath the surface. Days that once felt empty in the absence of motivation now contain a framework that guides you forward. The identity you adopt, disciplined, systematic, resilient, becomes the lens through which you view every challenge. You no longer ask whether you feel like working. You simply follow the process you have designed, and the results follow. Consider a mini scenario that ties the lessons together. A marketing manager, Alex, wakes each morning with a list of campaigns to launch. The desire to be creative fuels the day, but by mid-morning the inbox is a vortex. Alex writes the outcome, launch the email sequence by 2 p.m., then identifies the smallest action. Open the email platform and draft the subject line. The kettle whistles, signaling the start of work. After 10 minutes of drafting, Alex records the progress and stretches, rewarding the consistency. Energy dips in the afternoon, so Alex switches to the buffer, a 15-minute review of the campaign timeline instead of building the full landing page. Throughout, Alex repeats, I am someone who moves from subject line to launch without checking messages first. At week's end, Alex reviews the log, notices that the kettle cue works best, and decides to add a second cue, closing the office door to reinforce focus. The cycle repeats, each iteration smoother than the last. Reflection questions can deepen the internal dialogue. What story do you tell yourself about who you are when motivation is low? How does that story limit or empower you? Which external cue feels most natural in your environment, and why does it resonate? When you observe a day where the buffer saved you, what emotions surfaced, and how can you honor that rescue mechanism? How does speaking your identity in the present tense shift your perception of effort? What pattern emerges from your weekly data, and what single tweak feels both doable and meaningful? Transitions between each lesson need not be abrupt. They can flow like a river, finding new channels. After separating desire from execution, the next logical step is to create a reliable trigger that carries you across the gap. Once the trigger is in place, the brain craves acknowledgement, leading naturally to a feedback loop. When the loop solidifies, you notice the occasional low tide, prompting the design of a buffer. With a buffer secured, the language you use to describe yourself becomes the final seal that locks the system in place, and regular reflection ensures the river never stagnates. Memorable lines can serve as quiet mantras that echo when doubt creeps in. The structure you build is the lighthouse that stands when the storm of feeling recedes. Discipline is not a fleeting feeling. It is the architecture you inhabit, the floor plan that remains when the furniture of emotion is moved. When the world asks whether you are ready, the answer is already built into the routine you follow. In practice, the shift from "I will work when I feel like it" to "I am someone who works regardless of feeling" feels like moving from a sailboat at the mercy of wind to a motor vessel with a steady engine. The engine does not wait for gusts, it turns on command. Your system is that engine, and the cues you set are the ignition key. Each micro step is a piston stroke, each feedback loop a gauge confirming power, each buffer a fuel reserve, each present tense affirmation the dashboard display, and each weekly review the maintenance schedule. If this perspective resonates, you may find value in connecting with others who prize steady progress over fleeting inspiration. Communities that share tools, stories, and adjustments can amplify the sense that you are not alone on this engineered path. Regular insights that cut through the noise can help you refine the structure you live inside, adding new components without compromising the core. Remember, discipline is not a feeling. It is a structure you choose to live inside. Let that structure be the constant you rely on when everything else fades. The quiet confidence that emerges from this approach is not arrogance. It is the calm assurance that you have built a reliable bridge across the gap between intention and achievement. As you walk this path, each day will present a chance to test the system, each setback an invitation to tweak a lever, each success a reminder that the architecture you have erected is sound. The journey toward a disciplined identity is just beginning, and each new insight will add another tool to your growing system. May the framework you create become the steady pulse that carries you forward, even when the spark of motivation is nowhere to be seen.